So good evening and welcome everyone to the public keynote, the one of the highlights of this year's IGN 2024 e-conference on peace building. The Institute for Global Negotiation is a Swiss institute founded about 10 years ago, and we try to promote and support the use of negotiation as the essential tool in building a more equitable and peaceful and sustainable future. And to do this, we have a couple of events every year, one of them being the e-conference, which happens every year online, hence the name. And this is the 2024 edition focused on peace building. And each of our conferences features a public keynote. And tonight, I am very happy that we can welcome Andrew Russell, a former coordinator of the UNDP program in Kosovo and Cyprus, and later also senior advisor to the United Nations in New York on organizational questions, who will share with us misadventures in peace building. So he's going to share insights from a couple of decades experience in the field. And I'm very happy, Andrew, that you are joining us tonight. I am just going to give you the spotlight, and I am then going to take it away from me in a second and leave it just to you. Andrew is going to speak for about half an hour, tell us his story and tell us his insights. And afterwards, we have another half an hour approximately for questions from the audience. If you have any questions, type them in the chat, or afterwards, raise your hand digitally and you will be called upon to speak by our moderator tonight, Daria Kandoga, who's a PhD student in war studies at King's College in London. So we're balancing war with peace, but we hope it is going to be all quite peaceful in the end. And with that, Andrew, it's over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. And maybe just to take a second to share my screen. And yeah, just to maybe start by explaining, well, why am I talking today or tonight? I have the great pleasure. I've been teaching with the president of the Institute for Global Negotiation, Jack, who's with us today, for the past few years, and so he reached out to me, and I was, when I saw the topic of the conference, then it really started to resonate with me, because these are three themes that have been particularly important for me in my career as a peace builder. And so I thought, well, that's great. I will definitely say yes, because because I can help at least by providing some direct experience in the exploration of the roles of feminism, religion, and the arts in peace building. So I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you guys today. Just to give you a little bit of background about me. So I spent about 30 years with the United Nations. I spent 10 of those years working in Central America during the peace processes there. I then started a sort of a parallel career in New York on issues around strategic planning, organizational change. Went back to Cyprus, worked on peace building there. Went back to New York, worked on strategic planning, organizational change, UN reform, and then back to Kosovo, and then one more time back to the Secretariat to work on the UN reforms at the end of the 2010s. Then I left, and part of the reason why I left was because I really felt that I'd gotten to a point where I needed to spend, and I wanted to spend a lot more time thinking about what I did wrong, the few things I did right, and really trying to come from a place of deeper reflection. I think as practitioners, we find that we really never have enough time to reflect. I always used to love doing retreats. I always used to love trying to get people together to reflect on what we're doing, but there's never enough time. There's never enough time to read, to engage with people. And now I consult and I teach, and it's a nice way of being able to continue to work on the issues that I love, but without having to hop on a plane every day or every other day. and to really have a lot more space. Now, if I was to summarize 30 years in peace building, I would summarize it in this slide. And this also helps explain also why, one of the important reasons why I felt like I needed to stop being a UN official, because I felt again and again I had met the enemy and it was me. And what do I mean by this? This is a cartoon, a pogo cartoon from about 50 years ago. It's actually was done for, I think, the first world, what was it called? Earth Day. And it's Pogo and his friend looking at all the pollution in the forest. And this is the punchline. Yet we have met the enemy and he is us. And why for me is this the biggest takeaway of the 30 years that I spent in peace building? Because I realized again and again that as I would engage, and as many of my partners and collaborators would engage in peace building, we kept making the same mistake over and over again, which was to look at ourselves as somehow separate from the system in which we were operating, that we were this kind of pure external peace building facilitative type role, and not understanding that we were actually, the very first moment we landed in the country, if we were coming from somewhere else, the moment we engage in the system, we're part of the problem. And if I look back and look at all of the mistakes that I made and all of the challenges that I faced, so many of them again and again came back to this fundamental problem, which is that either I or the people I was working with or collaborating with or the other people on the other side we're not fully prepared to understand that we are also we are there to help, we are there to support, but we are also there potentially to make things much worse. And if we don't realize that, if we don't understand our own role in the creating the problems that this world finds, then we're going to stumble again and again. And for me, this actually related to a particular experience that I had in Guatemala, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But it was really, for me, that experience in Guatemala was with the first time working on the individual aspects of peace building. And what do I mean by that? It was the first time working on the peace process in Guatemala where it suddenly occurred to me, I'm not sure where do these physical divisions come from, right? And what comes first? Do we, in conflict situations where we want to try and build peace and bring people together, what comes first? The physical division, and here we actually, this is not from Guatemala, but this is a picture from the buffer zone in Cyprus, where I also spent some time, which is a very physical representation of the division of the country. But I think the work that I did in Guatemala, working on consensus building and trying to bring people together, using a rather unique methodology that was very futures focused and was very much focused on individual mindsets and helping to transform individual mindsets. It was the first time I really started to wonder, well, wait a second, I'm assuming that I'm there in El Salvador, I'm there in Guatemala, and there are all these divisions, and obviously because of those divisions and the fighting, these external divisions that we see, we're in conflict with each other, right? And it was the very first time that I started to understand, maybe not so much in my own mind, but in the minds of some of the people that we were helping to move forward and build consensus with, there is a division in our minds. And what is that mistake? What is that mistake that we're making? And in doing this, I was exposed in doing this work on sort of the connection between individual mindsets and transformation that we were able to do in Guatemala. I was exposed for the first time to the writings of a quantum physicist named David Bohm. And it was the first time also for me that I was able to really start to connect this to, well, what is this fundamental error that we're making, right? And this is, this is not a spiritual statement that he's making here. He's making this statement from the point of view of a quantum physicist. So from a point of view of a quantum physicist, the notion of a separate organism is in fact an abstraction. And the boundaries between those separate organisms is an abstraction. So from the perspective of him as a quantum physicist, there is nothing but unbroken wholeness, right? And the moment I sort of connected with this writing and with these ideas, it was like, okay, I'm starting to understand this now. These conflicts that we first and foremost create in our minds. Why am I saying that we create them in our minds? Because they are abstractions. They are ideas. They don't actually exist in the physical reality of the universe that we operate in. Every single thing, whether I'm talking about the conflict between my organization and your organization, or the division between my family and your family, or the argument that I'm having with my parents, or the debates, across different religions or ideologies or ethnicities. These are not real. These are human constructs that we have created, right? So again, and I'll leave it here for now, we have met the enemy, and it is us. We are the ones who have created these divisions. And it's only through our own individual transformation that we can start to heal these sorts of divisions. And so for me, what this opened up then is this question. There's another question, which is, okay, well, what are some of the ways that different leaders and peace builders in different situations have used this individual capacity to create bridges, to break down barriers, to open up spaces for people to understand that we are connected, and that we do have a broader, there is a broader system in which we are operating that connects us all. And fortunately, one of the first, ways that I was exposed to this kind of leadership was in Central America. I got there a few months after a number of Jesuit priests had been murdered. Also relatively recently, after Romero was murdered in El Salvador, and what I was able to witness there, particularly in the role of the Catholic Church in El Salvador in this particular case, and later on in Guatemala, was that the courage of these individuals to speak out for the most marginalized, to speak out for those who are suffering due to the conflict, to reach out and to try and help people to understand that this violent, very violent conflict that was happening in El Salvador was pointless from the perspective of what was truly important to the people of El Salvador, and their willingness to speak out on that, their willingness to speak out for the most excluded, ended up in them being killed, right? And yet, despite the fact that these people were no longer physically present in El Salvador, their message echoed and their message resonated in so many different people working for peace in El Salvador. And it opened up space, and it helped people. It helped. Their murders were not in vain, in the sense that it helped to open up this space that then very quickly afterwards, and I got there in the spring of 1990, moved the kind of the playing field, so that there could be a more a movement towards, first and foremost, recognizing the importance of human rights in the conflict and being able to address that with a peace accord, and then to be moving on into other aspects of the peace process. Later on, I was also inspired by the work of the Catholic Church again in Guatemala. And this was Bishop Girardi's work with the Catholic Church to do a, a very comprehensive and truth commission. It was called Nunca Más, Never Again. The Catholic Church, there was a more official truth commission process, but this was the one that really, invested in bringing the voices of the excluded, the voices of those who had been impacted, the poorest of the poor, helping them, the victims of massacres, to be able to bring their voices to the forefront. And again, the process itself and the courage of this religious leader to and those working with them to go out and really try and endeavor to find the truth behind what had been happening in Guatemala after this 30-year conflict that they had, again ended in his murder. And I will never forget. I was there. The report was launched. It had an immediate impact, and 2 days later he was dead. And we all got to I think it was on a Sunday, and we all got there on Monday, and we were shocked, and we were saddened, and we were depressed. The peace process had barely begun, and here, somebody who had taken this risk to bring this enormous effort to bring the voices of the excluded, out for people to hear and to read, had been killed. I remember my boss at the time, Lars Franklin, and a man who's inspired me greatly as a peace builder, was meeting with different people, leaders, civic leaders, civil society leaders, indigenous leaders in Guatemala, others who were coming to speak with him, who wanted to share. He was the UN resident coordinator at the time. They wanted to share their anguish. They wanted to share their sadness with him, that this effort that we had been supporting and that everybody was waiting for had now so immediately led to the death of this religious leader. And this sort of leads me to my last point for now about the inspiration that I have had directly from religious leaders. Lars had been somebody who'd spent many, many years in Central America, particularly in Guatemala, and he had taken his role as a peace builder, as a peacebuilding leader, very, very seriously. And one of the things that he did was he exposed himself and became very, very familiar with indigenous spiritual practices and the indigenous viewpoint and the way of thinking of things. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He came to join us for lunch after the morning was over, and we were all, completely depressed. And he was able to share with us, drawing on this indigenous spiritual inspiration from Guatemala. He sat with us and helped us to understand that we really shouldn't look at this as something that in the time frame of a typical Western sort of European time frame, but really he helped us to understand that from a more of an indigenous viewpoint, this was such a small piece in the puzzle, but probably a very, very important piece in the puzzle. And just that how we'd seen that these murders in El Salvador had helped to shift things over time, that we would find over time that the loss of this man's life was just one small piece in a time frame that goes on for generations and generations. And we were just sort of sitting there and staring at him and going, whoa, because he actually had a smile on his face as he was talking about it. Not that he wasn't upset by the murder, but he was able to help us to understand this kind of indigenous Guatemalan Mayan perspective of, look at this in the broader framework of what is happening in Guatemala over time. So just before I move on, just a few kind of quotations here. So this is a quotation from the Popol Vuh, the Guatemalan Mayan text, about the importance of of understanding that we are all connected, and that we don't, we don't need to negotiate necessarily. We need to understand our purposes and our ideas and put those together, agree on that first, and then we can move forward to decide together. This second quotation is from this, I mentioned before, this exercise that we did, and it was called Vision Guatemala, and it was bringing different people from different sectors of society in Guatemala to do scenario planning around the future. And this is a quotation. And again, I think for me, this quotation, this comes from a book that the facilitator of that process, Adam Kahane, wrote, called Solving Tough Problems. But he brings out some of the quotations of some of the people who were involved in this peace building process. And again, for me, this quotation resonates so much with me as a peace builder, because it does get to this notion of we all are connected. It's all connected, and that we have to understand at a very human level that, yes, even if I'm sitting in a room with somebody who may have been implicated in some atrocity, in a conflict situation, obviously, yeah, nobody actually goes to school or goes out into the world, into their military career, in order to learn how to massacre women and children. And then the final quotation here was, there was a sort of a particular moment in the process in Guatemala where some stories were being shared, and there was a story around a particular massacre that left people able to, in that room, to connect around the fact that wherever you stood on the spectrum, whether you were a ex-guerrilla or ex-military or right-wing, left-wing, old, young, indigenous, non-indigenous, they were able to connect around the fact that such atrocities, like the sorts of atrocities that happened in Guatemala, were something that everybody could agree needed to be avoided in the future. And this was an indigenous person who was in the room, who said to Adam, the facilitator of the process, he was amazed that there was this kind of spiritual feeling in the room, and he connected it to this particular indigenous day of the spirits as well. So that's sort of part one of our three areas of work. And I'm probably running a little bit behind time, so I'll try and speed up a little bit. I want to talk next about women in peace building, and we can talk about sort of all the evidence that is out there, all the reasons why it's important to engage in peace building with a gender lens. We can talk about, the role that women play. I just want to talk for a few minutes about my own practical experience. So I was in Cyprus. Cyprus is in this interminable. It's like Groundhog Day, right? They wake up and the same thing happens over and over again, right? They mediate, they get together, and then at some point in the process, somebody pulls out and the whole thing falls apart. So these are quotations from two different mediators, 10 or 12 or 13, I forget how many years apart. The first one is Alvaro Soto when I was there. The second one is the more recent process that fell apart. But it's the same thing happening over again. Now, look around. Where are the women? Where are the women in these photos, right? They are not in the picture. They're not in the picture in Cyprus, in any way or form, right? The space is very closed there. And these peace negotiations have been very exclusive. They have been very male dominated. And, for me coming, to what is a European country, this was something that was quite surprising to me. But I also just very, very briefly should tell you that once, the peace process failed while I was there in 2004, well, it didn't stop there. That basically, particularly on the Greeks, on the Greek Cypriot side, Greek Cypriot politicians and aided and embedded by the media, which sort of came after those of us who were perceived, whether we were with the UN or our partners who were perceived as being in support of the Annan Plan. We were not officially in support, but we were helping to prepare the ground for the implementation of the Annan Plan, and we were also working on helping to make sure everybody was exposed to what was in the plan. So we did a lot of dissemination work. But basically this, without getting into all the details, we found ourselves under attack. And these are just some of the quotations and you know that appeared in the media. But basically the basic idea being we're, you know, on the Greek Cypriot side, we're not satisfied with just making sure that this peace plan doesn't go forward for reasons that were very important to them at the time. We want to make sure that those who are perceived as being supporters of the Annan Plan on the Greek Cypriot side understand that this isn't going anywhere. It's not coming back. This plan is over. And so as a team, we were traumatized. We were an entirely intercommunal team. We had a few international, but mostly we were Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot. And it was a really, really tough time for us. And over time, during the first sort of few months that I was there, for whatever reason, though the people that I had on my team, I had some shifting. I had one team member who left. I had another team member who left. I had to hire a few more people, and who wanted to come and join the team, but women. So eventually, within, you know, sort of by the end of 2004, moving into 2005, I mean, this was basically my team. This was my team on the ground. These were female peace builders. They came from both sides of the buffer zone. We worked together. We collaborated together, and I really give all the credit to them. Now, I'm not an expert on gender. I cannot tell you, I cannot, explain to you exactly what happened, in this particular context. All I know is that this particular group of people, that just happened, not because I intentionally hired women, but it just happened that we ended up with this essentially all-woman programmatic team on the ground. We're the ones who really helped me and our partners to come back together to figure out what we wanted to do in the future, to take a new approach. And this was part of our philosophy. And again, I'm not trying to say necessarily that men are not capable of connecting to this kind of in a sense, deeply personal a way of approaching peace building that these women peace builders that I was working with were open to connecting with. So we were open collectively to letting go of what we had been doing because it wasn't working. I mean, we were being attacked. We needed to let go to old identities and the need to try and kind of like, okay, we got to find new possibilities, and we need to connect to, well, what is, that next step for Cyprus? And again, we don't have the time here to get into all the details, but part of what we realized was that we obviously needed to work more broadly on issues of civic participation and civic inclusion. And we were sort of looking around and had done some work on cultural heritage, but it was really during this period of time. And this is sort of just to jump on the final point of what I wanted to talk about. Now, the theme of this conference are the arts more broadly. I want to talk more specifically about cultural heritage within that broader context. Yes, in Cyprus in particular, we also worked in a lot. I could also talk a lot about the role of peace builders, the role of arts in the arts in peace building. We worked with people working in the theater. We worked with musicians. We worked with others, other types of artists. I mean, here, without getting into too much detail, I mean, I think the limitation there was that we tended to be engaging with the usual suspects, right? That these were people who tended to be very open to collaboration, to building peace with us. They loved, we loved working with them. It was always entertaining, et cetera, but minimal impact. Now, where I felt we really started to get more leverage was on this issue of cultural heritage as a unifying force within that broader context. These are some photos of some of the work that we did in Cyprus. We failed Apostos Andreas, which is this wonderful Cypriot Orthodox church, great historical value, cultural value in the Karpus Peninsula up in the northern part under Turkish occupation, Turkish Cypriot side of the island. And then we've got the Nicosia Venetian walls right in the divided city of Nicosia. And then you've got Hala Sultan Tekke, which is a very important Muslim monument that is on the Greek Cypriot controlled area. These were all projects that we worked on. Why did these work so effectively? They're expensive projects, but boy, there's so much that can be built out of that. So things like education around cultural heritage, bringing different people around education, bringing people together around learning how to do, the work of cultural heritage, bringing people around who are interested in history, interested in committed to maintaining the cultural heritage of the country, despite the barriers, despite the divisions. We were really able in Cyprus to move this from being a potentially very divisive issue. Oh, this is our Muslim monument, or this is our Armenian monument, or this is our Maronite, or Greek Cypriot, or Cypriot Orthodox, or whatever, to really bring it and make it a unifying theme for people to be working together on. And Apostos Andreas, again, no time to get into all the details, but it was a wonderful example of everyone coming together. This happened actually, we failed when I was there. It finally succeeded after I left, a number of years after I left. But there, what we really were able to tap into, and these are a couple of quotations from, I think, what is the biggest success of our work on cultural heritage in Cyprus, was that we created a intercommunal proto-federal institution. So this is one of the technical committees that has been set up in one of the many peace processes in Cyprus. It's still there. They work together. Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, working together to protect cultural heritage. They exist and they work together, and they continue to do projects together today. And here they talk about, why this work is so important to them, and why it's an issue that is able to, helps them to see that connection, to bridge those artificial gaps and those artificial barriers that we create to each other. And then the culture has no political or religious border. That this is a place where we can tear down these borders, and we can tear down these walls. And Apostos Andreas, as I said, and if you want, I can speak a little bit more to it about why Apostos Andreas was so important, but they were particularly proud of that particular work together. So just to the final postscript. So these experiences have inspired me in different ways, in different places. I ended up in Kosovo, where I fought very hard to bring the Cypriot experience on cultural heritage to Kosovo. I felt that there was, I had a great partner in crime at the time who was my peace and development advisor, Paul Partner, and we really fought hard to raise awareness to the fact that this could be a real winner in terms of helping to bring people together on multiple levels. There I got to reconnect to, I also got to work with religious leaders in Cyprus as well. That goes without saying, if you're working on, religious cultural heritage. I got to meet many wonderful people, but there's the photo there of one of the religious leaders that we got to work with, who was also very courageous in the way, as we worked with him on building the case for sort of this kind of inter-ethnic approach to working on cultural heritage and peace building. He was a great ally for us. We were able to eventually convince the European Union to fund it, and this work is still going strong. And on the left there, this is a more recent photo of the kind of educational work, bringing Kosovo Albanians, Kosovo Serbs, and others, ethnic minorities, to work together to learn about cultural heritage on the site and use that as a way of building bridges and building connections with each other. Because it's one thing to help connect people, it's another thing to help sort of sustain that connection over time. So you need to be able to find ways and issues that people are so passionate about that after the training is over, after the experience is over, they're willing to continue to connect with each other over, through and across those different boundaries and barriers. Finally, I mean, just a couple of photos of some of the people on my team in Kosovo. Certainly had a number of good male colleagues, but certainly didn't necessarily go out of my way to hire women. But again, just amazed by the quality of the work, the professionalism, and the willingness of the female colleagues on the team to take the risk of speaking to the other, of engaging with the other. These were people who had many responsibilities, and took the work very, very seriously. And again, in the same way that I was able to do in Cyprus, be able to in a sense know that these were people who were not going to necessarily suddenly find the conflict in the peace that we are trying to build together. These were really truly remarkable women that I got to work with in Kosovo as well. So that's my oh, sorry, this is my postscript. And then I got to go back to Cyprus, not last year, but the year before, and actually work on peace building with a group of female activists, with a group called Hand Across the Divide. We did this virtually. This is a quotation from Katerina Stefanou, one of the participants. We were working with female peace activists in Cyprus to help them to feel more empowered, to help them to feel more resilient, to help them to feel less frustrated by the very challenging circumstances in which they are doing this peace work in Cyprus. And I love this quotation from her. It brings us back to where I started, which is it all starts and ends with ourselves. And is there peace in our hearts? And is, the only place that peace can happen is in our own hearts. And then we can take that out to the people around us. And as she describes it, peace is our individual choice, but it takes awareness, and it takes skills, and it takes commitment. Again, it was a wonderful sort of postscript to my work in Cyprus, was to be able to go back there a year and a half ago or so and work again with women peace builders, and work again on this issue of the connection between our own personal individual transformation and the transformation that we seek to in the world. So I'll stop here. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening to me and sharing my experience with you. Happy to now be quiet for a little bit and pass it over to my esteemed moderator, and we'll take it from there. Thank you, Daria.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for speaking from the heart and for looking back at your experience and your long career. I think that was really inspirational and insightful and quite moving, actually. And I think what resonated with me was that we all think about the tough, different structural problems, but it really starts with us individually. And I think it's really important what you said, to remember that the barriers are artificial and that we have to deconstruct it. And what has the most impact is really to go back to what makes us all human. And those are things like religion, culture, the spiritual sphere. So thank you very, very much for speaking from your heart and experience. And having said that, I will now open the floor for questions. So please raise your hand or write in the chat, and then we can design the next 15 minutes on create an interactive space and share our impressions. Oh, Jack, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. And a couple of things which I'd like to come back to on and explore a little further with you was you talked about how initially you were talking, particularly in Cyprus, you were talking to peace activists. And there was a lot of motivation from their side. There was a lot of people very interested. And then when you moved into this culture, and that in some way, that community of ones who are very receptive to the ideas that you are bringing. And I think we see this often, though, that we see that we talk to people who agree with us, and then kind of we kind of like to forget those who are kind of opposed to us or not working with us. You mentioned in the cultural realm how that seemed to have you seem to be able to reach beyond that by talking about identity, by talking about this kind of shared history as well. I wonder, you said that the organization, I think it was Apostle, had a big effect on that. And I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail in looking at that, or what happened there. And also just again, how was it that we have to change our language and change our messages when we're talking to different actors, not change what we believe in, but maybe reframe it in a different way, to speak to their interests, as opposed to coming and bringing our message, which we have, which I'm sure people, particularly in Cyprus, have maybe heard again and again and again, but to reframe that message, and whether you think that's whether culture and religion seems to be a way in which we can do that.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm concocting in my mind a very long answer to your question, because it goes back a long way for me, in the sense that I was so, I didn't get much into the detail about this Vision Guatemala experience, but it was just so inspiring. Even though my wife got ill during, I was there for like, I forget, the first 6 months of it or something, and then I had to actually leave the country and follow it from New York, but then was able to develop a longer term project with the colleagues there, and reconnect with them later on. But basically, what came out of, one of the things that came out of that experience, but also what was this notion of people being willing to really become vulnerable, to question their own assumptions, to be in a place of trust with each other, to be able to kind of put down their barriers and move from a kind of a more defensive type of conversation into a more creative type of conversation. And that's why, I mean, Visual in Guatemala was so impactful. Even we did an evaluation 10 years later, and the people were still talking to each other. They describe themselves as being able to move from this trench over to the other side's trench. They had this ability to talk to each other through the barriers, across the barriers, etc. Now, what made that project successful over time was they found projects of mutual interest that they could work on together, despite their ideological or ethnic or whatever differences, right? And so I took some of that with me when I ended up working in Cyprus. And I was also inspired by another experience that actually had happened maybe a decade or so before in Cyprus, that the UN got involved in, which was that there was a huge problem in Nicosia after the 74 conflict, which was that which was that the processing of essentially the crap, the garbage and waste of the sewage of the Greek Cypriot side of Nicosia had been done in the north, right? And they had to figure out a problem. They had to figure out a solution to this problem, and that there had been a project of working together to make sure that everybody in Nicosia, north and south, could have their sewage treated in the aftermath of the conflict. It was a very practical problem. They had to treat their sewage. They had to collaborate with each other. They had to work together. And so you know, what I took from Guatemala, what I took, you know, and tried to also apply in Cyprus is the idea is that talk and contact. And also they've done a lot of training in Cyprus about conflict management and conflict management skills building and stuff. But if there was no opportunity to apply those skills on a systematic and sustained basis, that's what we needed to find. We needed to find those niches where people were really willing to and able to collaborate with each other, not for a week, not for months, but for years and years. Pastos Andreas was this kind of moonshot thing, because it's up in you know, in the Carpus Peninsula. There's a lot of emotional attachment on the Greek Cypriot side to this place. We ran into a lot of problems of our own making. But my successors, what they were able to do together with the European Union was to broker a deal where everybody who had an interest, so we had the technical commission set up, everybody who had an interest, formal, informal interest, and an ability to fund this project got involved. It was the only project that was co-funded by, I think it got money from Turkey, it got money certainly from the Turkish Cypriots, it got money from the Greek Cypriots, it got money from the European Union. I don't know if the Greeks threw in some money. Everybody got together and we're able to come up with you know, with the resources. And so everybody was equally committed, even financially, in making this a success. So you know, just the ability to be able to say, oh my goodness, you know, you guys found something that you cared so much about that you were all willing to not just sit back and allow it to happen, but you actually got financially engaged in making that project happen. So that's what made one of the reasons why we made that project, why that project was so impactful for them. Because it demonstrated to everybody that even communities in conflict with each other could actually go in a sense into business with each other. So you know, I think I'll leave it at that, Jack. But I absolutely agree that in every single context that I've worked in, yeah, there is this learning process of how you find that little that where you find those hooks that are really going to resonate in the local context. Because yeah, what you did in Guatemala, I really wished that we could do this kind of really intense, you know, reflective process, but it wasn't, nobody was going to allow that to happen in the Cypriot context.
There is another question from Julian Bruno Vogel. Julian?
Yeah. Yes, can you hear me? Good. I was wondering, you mentioned in the South American part Archbishop Romero and also other representatives of the, priests, etc., who worked as advocates for the poorest. And I was wondering, how did you experience? Was there also a connection back to? Was it organized from the, let's say, the Vatican or central Christian church structure, or was this just more a local phenomena? How did you, or was there the link back to the centers?
My my understanding was that these different leaders, certainly they were inspired. They're inspired by sort of the more progressive movement with it, movements within the Catholic Church as a whole, particularly in Latin America. Completely, I think they weren't necessarily completely acting on their own, but my own understanding is that they certainly we're not doing this, with the explicit, support, from the Vatican. These were individuals who were courageous, who felt, due to their own deep spiritual, sort of connection to the poor, that they had to speak out, that they had to, and I think they would have done so regardless of what the church as a whole thought of the process. I would say. Certainly there was I remember in Guatemala that I really had a much more of a sense of attention even within the Catholic Church around, how far did they want to go in terms of getting politically involved in the peace process. And so whereas I didn't see them so actively involved in the peace process itself, where they did come in was in this truth telling process that Bishop Girardi led on.
Are there any other? Oh, Caroline Miller, please.
Hi, thank you so much also from my side for this very honest and very personal insights of your work. I'm actually currently in New York working with a German mission an internship to the United Nations. So I can definitely see myself working in that field. So I was wondering when you were talking about like the reasons why you resigned from being a UN official, if you look at it now, maybe it's a very difficult question, but what needed to be changed that you would remain working in that job? Or if I frame it differently, if you would look into the future for the younger generations to come, what would you want to change to maybe deal with those challenges that you just described?
Well, yeah, there was this sort of brief period of time after my experience in Guatemala, and I was in New York, and we were kind of working on bringing this this very sort of personal approach to peace building and sort of personal transformation connected to the ability and to create the context and the spaces of trust to engage in dialogue with those we disagree with, and I was working on that, and it was time for me to be reassigned, and I got this opportunity to go to Cyprus, and found it quite challenging to take those sorts of ideas into the Cypriot context. But then also found that that initiative carried on for about another 2 or 3 years, and then we got a new Assistant Secretary General in who was not the one that I was working with, who was supporting this work, and it just disappeared, and it took me a while to really start to. I don't know whether I should say being bothered by this, but it was so obvious that in so many different contexts that I was working with later on in Kosovo as well, that all this focus, this focus on sort of bureaucratic processes and focuses on structural things and trainings and stuff like that, but just no willingness to talk about internal things. And even as I was leaving the UN, 2018, 2019, the whole issue of just simply the psychosocial aspects of conflict and trauma and peace building was only just starting to get to be talked about. Now, thank goodness now, at the UN and in other places we are, and wonderful people like the Dutch are funding this kind of work on trying to help us to integrate this work, And it's a night, you know, in by finally recognizing that, yeah, that peace building is not just about restoring the bridges and putting down your arms and reintegrating the ex-combatants, et cetera, but it's about also dealing with the trauma of conflict. It's a good start. And so I'm actually a bit more optimistic that we're moving in the right directions, but it's very, very, very slow. And I think we're at a turning point as a species, as a planet. You know, we have to stop thinking that the problem is over there. You know, that it's the problem is that that other person in that other place and that other thing needs, and really understand that you know, sort of we're in this together, and that it actually begins with our own ability to connect, you know, to, in a sense, to connect our hearts to what's really happening. And we don't have time to get into it today, but you know, if there was more time, I would give a couple of very clear examples of which helped to drive me out of the UN, where I realized that as I got more senior and senior in the UN, the protection of my own ego and my own position and that of my organization, even if I could care less about my organization, the people that I was working for wanted me to fight first and foremost for the organization, and not necessarily for what was right for the country or for what was right for the people that we were working with. And we don't have time to get into the examples of that, but that's where I realized that, well, I need to find a different hammer and a different toolkit, because you know, I'm part of the problem. My own ego is getting in the way here, and as I get more and more senior, I gotta bail out, because I realize it's not getting any better. I'll
Thank you.
become more and more part of the problem.
Thank you for the honest answer again. Thanks. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
So there is one question online on our YouTube live feed from Sally Fu, who's asking, Dear Andrew, thanks for your presentation. Could you please tell from your experience how your success stories with peace processes you work with can be transferable to the African context? So I know we're running over time, but perhaps Andrew, you could elaborate a little bit on that as well.
Honestly, yeah. I think if I've learned anything, it's not to transfer. Period. Don't transfer. Just go. You just need to go and listen and understand. You know, in that particular, whether it's a community, whether, you know, wherever the cultural, you know, the culture, the country context or whatever, just go and listen and try and understand, you know, who is it, you know, is it the religious leaders, or is it somebody else? Who are the people who have authority, who have legitimacy, who have the ability to open up their hearts and to be, in a sense, engaged in bridging leadership, and to identify and support those people, and to support those efforts and work with them to design the right sorts of peace building initiatives that work for them. I mean, yes, it's true that in Kosovo, you know, by the time I'd been there for about 3 years, it became pretty clear to me that cultural heritage was one of those areas, and that religious leaders in Kosovo were also the type of people who would be willing and open to that kind of collaboration. But, you know, I mean, Cyprus isn't that far away from Kosovo. Africa is a very different place, highly diverse. And yeah, my only recommendation is don't transfer. Find out, understand who are the peace builders, who are the people with the authority, and just, you know, make sure that you mobilize everybody's resources to help support them.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So it's past 7:30, so I thank you all for coming and for joining. And Andrew, thank you so much for sharing a very inspirational story of your career so far. And I think we all agree that it's great that you're teaching the skills that you learned, and then you're passing this on to younger generations. And I thank you, and I wish you all a very lovely weekend and Friday evening.
And just to say, I know you need to move on, but if anybody anybody wants to follow up with me, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm there, and we can set up a time to talk. I'm happy. That's part of why I do this sort of thing, is because it helps me to continue the conversation even beyond the conference. So thank you, everybody.